Hey everybody, welcome into the show. I am Tyler Greever with Mark Ennis and Andy Sweeney from ESPN Louisville. The purpose of this is kind of recap what happened for Louisville and Kentucky football this weekend. We're going to get right into it. Louisville, guys, I don't know if you could have scripted a worse start to such a crucial season for Scott Satterfield. The Cardinals lose 31-7 on the road at Syracuse. There's a lot of numbers we could pull out to illustrate how bad this was. But Mark, I mean, honestly, could you have scripted any worse of a start for this team?
No, I don't know that I could come up with anything worse than the way that it went, in particular because there were two kind of big things. You thought you had things you felt good about, that the team was going to be good at, this will be a strength, and then you thought they addressed issues.
Yeah.
And then when you get out on the field against Syracuse, the strengths aren't strengths anymore, and you have wide open wide receivers. You're not getting off the field on third down. You're turning the ball over. So, like, the strengths seem to have regressed. The issues last year, the defense, pass rush, all that stuff, didn't really materialize at all. And I don't know where you sort of go from there. I don't know what you build around. I don't know what the thread is, the hope is now.
I mean, there has to be fatigue with UofL fans. I mean, there has to a little bit. This is now back-to-back years they have bought in, and you guys know, and I know, every fan watching this knows that the rope is just going to be shorter this year. I mean, it's not just one loss, it's a continuation of the Kentucky game, the Air Force game, buying in, believing things were going to be fixed. The worrisome thing for me was you had the same issues that Mark's talking about, and then you threw Malik on top of it.
Yeah.
He was skittish. He was not good. And if he's not good, that is the basis of who you are. He is one of your best players. He has to be good. He can't look like he looked like last night, or Louisville's going to be in trouble.
And like more globally, sorry to jump in, more globally with the team, like you nitpick, it left a wide receiver open or predictability of play calling or what have you. All that stuff's true. But just at a more global level, they looked flat. They looked uninspired. They looked intimidated by what was on the field and the environment. And it defies explanation to me how anybody can be flat in the season opener.
Well, especially this season opener, though, too, because we had heard all offseason that this is a crucial year and that everybody knows you got to finish. We were so close last year. So if a loss happens to Syracuse, okay, I think somebody can accept that. But coming out and laying an egg is a totally different. Syracuse had 18 penalties. That's the most a Louisville opponent has had since 1963, and Louisville lost by 24 points. That is crazy concerning to me, but we mentioned the myriad of issues that went into this game. What maybe stands out as like the single most concerning thing that came out of it?
I think Andy already hit it. It's Malik Cunningham. Like, you assumed him, and when you assume like your quarterback or what have you, like for Louisville, it's a much bigger percentage of what they're building their hopes on with him. He's just a big piece of what they do. And for him to be, I think, tentative running, for him to be looking at the pass rush, throwing that post pattern, which should have been a touchdown, going away, leading it all the way over the other direction, and the backside corner can get over and intercept it. That stuff, he hadn't done that stuff in a long time. That's the most concerning. You at least were assuming the same Malik Cunningham from at least a year ago, or maybe even better, and you got a much sort of regressed version of that, and that can't stay.
Malik's the answer. I thought the defense may have settled down a little bit, but I thought they were going to wreak more havoc. I mean, Garrett Schrader looked like a totally different player, the Syracuse quarterback from last year to this year, and I know they got a new offensive coordinator, and Dino Babers turned that over to him. Maybe Scott Satterfield doesn't want to do that on his side, on the Louisville side. For me, what I think the big picture off the field worry is there was a lot of toxicity. Some of that, left. Guys transfer, guys leave, they graduate, they move on. But Scott Satterfield has to watch here that this doesn't turn. I mean, they got to win. They got to win on Friday. They need to turn around and come back home with that crowd at Cardinal Stadium and beat Florida State and rectify this. If this fire continues to burn, that's what I would worry about, is fans checking out, the angst around the program, the future of Scott Satterfield, and then we had that conversation at the end of last year. Well, that was just the end of last year. We're going to do that at the beginning and the whole middle of this year, and that's the worry.
It has a 2018 feel to it if this doesn't go well soon. the sooner he can make this game look like kind of a weird outlier, or this is sort of, look, teams do have a bad first game, and then you look back and you're like, what the heck happened in week one?
Sure.
I mean, that's his only hope is that whatever button didn't get pushed, that there is a dramatic turnaround, or there's a dramatic improvement from week 1 to week 2, and they have to beat UCF.
Yeah. Well, they get inside the 10 again, and they can't score, and you're supposed to have this offensive line.
And they burn timeouts.
And they burn timeouts, and they're losing yards.
And it was still all Malik. Like, there were a lot of the sort of predictable things from a year ago still there.
What you're talking about, beating back that fear creeping in fans' heads about, oh my goodness, we're doing this again, and what could give you hope. I think the thing that beats that hope back a little bit is that the issues we're all talking about, we've watched them for the past couple of years. There was no sign of a step forward on either side of the ball with the new additions you made on the staff to show, hey, we've been listening to you guys. We know we've struggled here, and this is how we're fixing it. I think that's most concerning to me is anything. People want to see a sign of change, and there was absolutely none in that game.
The whole point was to sell us on a little bit of both. The defense is going to stay sort of at its core the same, but we're going to temper it and season it a little differently with what Wesley McGriff likes to do.
Right.
And it'll be, we were just off, just a beat off over and over and over again. A year ago, we're going to fix that this year with a little bit more aggression, a little bit, just the input of McGriff. Hey, have you thought about this? And they've talked about all that. And then it went out there, and we said it on postgame on the radio yesterday. There wasn't one element that the defense did where I was like, oh, that's what Wesley McGriff.
No fingerprints left on anything.
Nowhere.
Anywhere on either side of the ball. We've already touched on a little bit. The last question we'll deal with Louisville, and it's going to be a question I think that we keep revisiting if this season goes like this. What does this do to the pressure on Scott Satterfield, and how much does it add on with, it feels like we're almost going to do a referendum every single game and what that result is, and I think that's what this group wanted to avoid more than anything. That's what we're going to do. I don't know how we avoid it, right? I mean, unless he starts stringing together wins, and the problem is you can't speed up time. We just got to wait. We got to wait till Friday for Central Florida, and then we got to wait for another Friday for Florida State. And he's just going to slowly over these weeks have to compile it. But I mean, you guys are right. Us talking about the coaching, the recruiting that was coming in here. I mean, listen, people can say you can't get rid of Scott Satterfield because of the recruiting. I would almost argue it the other way. I would almost argue it the other way of is he, if you get better players, is he going to develop these guys? I mean, his best player right now, Malik Cunningham, has taken a step back. There's no doubt about that. Well,
and also, I think the particularly scary part about the team being flat, like they were for UK, is no one sees it coming. And last night, no one sees it coming. No one has a really good explanation for it. And Scott somehow, if that's going to be the persistent issue with the team, recruits don't change that.
Yeah.
That's the one. Somehow you've got a recruiting class that almost makes you bulletproof, and you have found the one way for it to not help you. Because recruits, you give him 5-star players everywhere, and they're flat and sort of unprepared, and it's not a great scheme. That doesn't help.
It's like a systemic problem. Because even going beyond Malik, who's supposed to be the best player on the team, he looks like he takes a step back. The offensive line is supposed to be a great group. They did not look good in this game. So the key guys on this group don't look like they are taking steps forward, and that's a huge issue to address in the coming weeks. Let's move over to Kentucky now. A much better opener, beating Miami of Ohio 37-13. It was a little tight in the first half. They pull away in the second half. Guys, I think the young receiver group was a huge question mark for UK coming into this year. But Dane Key, Tavion Robinson, Barryon Brown, and others seemed to play pretty well. Were you impressed with them last night?
I was impressed with the wide receivers. Absolutely. I mean, that was the main big takeaway, besides covering the number, of course, for me, for Kentucky.
What was the spread on it?
It was a 15 and a half. Depending how early or late in the week you got it. But no, it was the wide receivers. They talked them up. And I mean, I will say just quickly on Louisville, Evans was good. T. Huddy was good. Okay, someone's got to get the passes. For Kentucky, it was similar. I mean, they talked up their pass catchers, wide receiver-wise. They were good. Tight ends, maybe not so much. They might have had to block because of the offensive line was struggling against Miami of Ohio. But wide receiver-wise, there is a chance in totality that it's one of the better groups that they have had. Dane Key's touchdown near the end of the game was a rocket from Levis, sideline coverage, kind of a hands catch. I mean, for a freshman, I can understand why Mark Stoops is not putting lesser, older players on the field.
Yeah.
He's putting better, younger players on the field, and Kentucky's going to play 6, 7, 8 freshmen in key spots this season.
Yeah, I think that group needed to show something to everyone because you lose a guy like Wan'Dale Robinson, who was dominant for them last season, a guy like Josh Ali, who was kind of a steady force for them. And honestly, UK didn't run the ball very well last night with no Chris Rodriguez. And I think if there's something from that first half where it was a little tight, I think it was 13-10 at halftime, that is concerning. It's the fact that UK did not run the ball very well, and they're known for a dominant offensive line that didn't play particularly well in that game.
I don't think they tried to run the ball last night to where, like, I think maybe on the outside we would look at it and be like, that might be an issue for them, especially with sort of how we know Stoops likes to play. But I don't think they thought they really needed to, and this was about a bunch of pass reps for
the younger
Levis
guys,
with new wide receivers, right? And while we sort of do this like addition by subtraction thing where it's like, I know Wan'Dale Robinson's going, but the group will be better because it's not just one guy. But they look really,
that might be
really
the case.
good.
Yeah, it might be the case. I mean, the fall off last year between Wan'Dale and anybody else, Josh Ali was fine. He missed games, in the middle of the season. He was unavailable. I am, a big part of me, I've heard a little bit what Mark's talking about of, you don't want to show too much. Florida's coming up on Saturday. They had to show a lot, big game, top 10 team in Utah coming into Gainesville. That, Kentucky's, they're going to be a little generic. But they were generic. They were throwing the ball this time. They weren't running. Usually Mark Stoops is, we'll line up, we'll run the football, we'll be generic, we'll win by, 21, and we'll just kind of move on. I'm worried about their offensive line. I want to be clear. I mean, they've had 5 new players. They have had injury issues the entire camp. You're already trying to be cohesive, so that's already affected. You have a new coach on top. I mean, they lost some good players. I mean, they lost multiple NFL guys off that offensive line. I think it's going to be a work in progress, and I think if they lose to Florida, it's going to be one of the main reasons why. Kentucky looked generic running the football, and that's the first time in a long time under Mark Stoops that you could say that, and it was Miami of Ohio, and Levis was under duress too much for facing a MAC school,
especially
period.
When he's coming into this season with so much hype after playing well last year. I thought he played well last night. He threw the pick on 4th down. I don't really hold that against him too much because on that 4th down play, you just got to get the ball to somebody and try something in that scenario. But as a whole, you're taking an offensive line group that's still working out some kinks and a group of young receivers who arguably one of the toughest places to play in the country in the swamp. Everybody's going to have to be on the same page for that to happen. Florida impressed me with that win over Utah. How big is this game?
I think the good news for Kentucky is just to wrap up Miami of Ohio. They were kind of choppy. They were uneven through the ball a whole lot of times instead of it sort of being a balanced thing. And they won comfortably, which is a great place to be where like you can win, you never really have to sweat it, you get to play a lot of guys, but then there's a lot to teach too. Out of it. That's progress to get to the place where you're like a not great effort and it never was in doubt and you covered.
I mean, maybe 3-4 years ago, 5 years ago, this is a 7-point game.
Right.
Yeah.
We're in overtime with UK.
With 5 minutes to go. Right. Yeah, there's no doubt about that.
But yeah, this Florida game, I think this Kentucky, we'll see about them as them, but in a vacuum. But I think the scarier thing for Kentucky coming out of the first weekend is that their schedule looks hard. You look like maybe one more good year of sort of taking advantage of teams in the East being in this transition or sort of just stumbling around. Florida looks very good, and Napier looks good at what he does. Tennessee looks really good. Georgia looks.
They look like Georgia.
The national champion.
Georgia embarrassed Oregon last night.
Just
embarrassed them.
Like the schedule. It's the SEC schedule. Tennessee looks very good. It's going to be really, really difficult for them. It's going to be harder than you thought coming into the year.
And that quarterback matchup in the swamp between Levis and Anthony Richardson is going to be one of the better early quarterback matchups we get. Obviously, this game also has bigger significance than just the typical UK-Florida matchup does because Mark Stoops, if he wins, will be at 61 career wins at Kentucky. That passes the legendary Bear Bryant as the winningest coach in Kentucky football history. It kind of feels obvious to ask the question, what does this mean for Mark Stoops' legacy? But does this not cement his accomplishments by if it's this week or whenever it comes this year, because it will happen this year?
Well, I think he already cemented it by talking back to John Calipari and having Mitch Barnhart back him publicly instead of John Calipari.
It's almost like the Bear Bryant, Adolph Rupp, Zippo lighter, Cadillac. comes full circle. And I agree with you. Yeah, officially he'll win the game and finally pass him.
Eventually,
but he passed him when he won the PR battle with the basketball coach.
There's a bunch of flags around Lexington too. We're a football school at the tailgates. Yeah,
I'm kind of not surprised to hear that.
Yeah, there's a few of those. Yeah, there was a few of those.
Well, what has impressed you the most, I guess, about what he has accomplished at UK in terms of turning them around and turning them into, there are people coming into this season saying, what do we got to do to beat Georgia and take the East? That wasn't even part of the thought process for so many years with this.
Here's what it is, and Mark will, I think, agree with this. It's the good old boy SEC media thinking Mark Stoops and Kentucky aren't trash.
Yeah.
I mean, they voted them second in the East.
Yeah.
I mean, for years we did radio shows where it was like them and Vandy at the very bottom, and it was always that. Even when Kentucky thought, "Hey, we're better than this. Why are we being voted preseason in a silly poll by SEC gas bags, near the bottom?" And listen, we can say it's because of Tennessee and Florida's been down with the new coach, and we can go through Missouri and all those excuses. But in the end, Kentucky isn't viewed the same way. And it's not viewed the same way by SEC people who have mocked Kentucky for decades. And that's a fundamental change. But this year they can't be 7-5. I say that, you go out and you take a massive step back with a quarterback who could be a first rounder, we can have a conversation.
He's gotten better as a head coach too. And we don't ever really talk about coaches themselves improving, but not being able to speak to which running back was in the game for what reason. Sort of cycling through offensive coordinators and trying to decide really like philosophically, what do I want to be? Sending 8 guys out to recover a punt, out of a timeout, not covering a Florida receiver.
They've goofed games, multiple games.
Stuff like that. But the vast majority of that stuff is very much in the past. The guy's gotten better as a game day coach, which I always thought was kind of his biggest weakness.
He had to hit worst case scenario where they literally could not throw the ball and they were bailed out. The offensive line, Lynn Bowden was this weird, kind of special player, hybrid player. Yeah, it worked.
It did work.
Eddie Gran figured it out, but he had to sit down, and when they hit rock bottom, he had to change who he was. He had to change who he was, and he did change who he was with the back-to-back coordinators. I mean, they threw the ball over 30 times. I mean, they're fourth and one throwing the football yesterday.
I think also he has created a belief that in ugly games and in tight games that they'll win. And I mean,
did
that
last year.
has never been there.
I think it's part of the physical, smash mouth culture they've tried to establish from day one. But I'm glad you talked about the transition to coordinators, because that's something that it's such a challenge for every coach. I know I don't need to explain this to anyone around Louisville, because we've seen Chris Mack fail at it in basketball, trying to change his style a little bit. And I think even Scott, with the assistant hires that he made, people wanted to see it. Mark Stoops, so far, the jury's still out on Scancarello because we only have one game. But from what Liam Cohen brought, Kentucky showed that it could become a little bit more of a pro-style team and throw the ball, as opposed to we're just going to run the ball down your throat and play smash mouth football all the time.
I think the last 2 years there have been ramifications on what kind of recruits he was going to be able to get offensively, not offensive line and running backs. Mark Stoops has been able to competently go get those guys, but quarterbacks, skill position guys. I mean, I think it makes sense that they bring in this recruiting class, okay, and they develop Levis all when they have had better offensive coordinators. I think that lines up, and I think we understand why there is some alignment there. And so if Will Levis can go out and be the 12th pick in the draft, and some of these guys look like NFL wide receivers, Kentucky can start getting guys. The ramifications are go get better players on offense, and it's always been just running back and offensive line. That's the change here.
The more I think about it, the answer to the question, like what's impressed you most, might really be that the conventional wisdom was always that if Kentucky was going to compete in the SEC, it was going to have to do like what Mississippi State is doing, like Mike Leach and air raid.
Go against the grain.
Well, yeah, go air raid or gimmicky in some way, and they did have some success with Hal Mummy doing that very thing. But that was the wisdom. What no one thought they'd ever be able to do is line up and play man ball with Georgia or with anybody else,
right on there.
And they have. While Stoops kind of figures out what style of offense he really prefers himself, they've That's like they've struggled to get receivers, like you were saying. They've gotten linemen like crazy and front seven people that no one thought Kentucky would be able to get on, and that might be the single greatest sort of achievement there is that they've won in the way no one thought Kentucky could win the SEC.
I know one thing we can all agree on is that it's just nice to talk about games again. It feels so good. No matter how poorly it might have gone for Louisville or how well it went for Kentucky or vice versa, it's just great to have college football back. That's going to do it for this first edition. That's Mark Ennis. That is Andy Sweeney. You can catch them on ESPN Louisville. I'm Tyler Greever. Thanks for watching.